Thank you, Chairman Durbin, for inviting me to co-chair this hearing, as well as to your committee staff for all the work they put into organizing today. I often say that no state has more at stake in immigration reform than my home state of California. And it's especially true when it comes to the essential role of farm workers. California is the agricultural heart of the nation. We know that more than a third of our country's vegetables and 2/3 of fruits and nuts come from California. In fact, farmers in California, not just in California, but especially in California, struggle every year to hire as many farm workers as they need to pick major crops. That's been the case since prior to the pandemic. That's why our agricultural industry has relied for decades on the labor of immigrants. If we look back in our nation's history and recall that during both our major world wars, immigrants kept our country fed. We'll recall the Bracero program, for example, which brought millions of temporary workers to California at the time. We also reflect on the 1960s, when California's immigrant farm workers led a historic boycott to fight for safer working conditions. Today, an estimated 60, upwards of 75% of California's farm workers are undocumented. Now, these dedicated individuals work back-breaking jobs for hours on end to give their families a better chance in life and to feed all of our families across the nation. That's why I believe they deserve better wages, better working conditions, including overtime pay, but I digress. That may be a subject of a hearing on another day. But let's reflect on this last year and a half. During the COVID-19 pandemic, it wasn't just the United States government. Let's be clear about this. Donald Trump's Department of Homeland Security deemed farm workers essential workers. Think about what that means. Formal recognition by the federal government that farm workers, regardless of immigration status, are critical to our nation, critical to the food supply, critical to our economy. We can't live without them. I think that was the case long before the pandemic, but it was formalized during the COVID-19 pandemic. It's no surprise that despite the challenges of COVID, farm workers continue to show up for work, despite the triple threats of the pandemic, extreme heat waves, and record-breaking wildfires. Now, because of their outsized presence on the front lines and the climate crisis, farm worker communities have suffered a disproportionate number of illnesses and deaths, but they still continue to show up for work. At the same time, many of these workers face increased risks because of their undocumented status, showing up for work despite living in fear of deportation. Too many were denied the necessary PPE to try to mitigate the risks they were exposed to. Others unable, because of ineligibility, to seek health care. Too many afraid to speak out against the dangerous working conditions for fear of retaliation, including but not limited to threats of deportation by their employer. More than 500,000 farm workers, more than 500,000 essential farm workers per the US government contracted the coronavirus, and thousands of them lost their lives. Farm workers and all workers who've worked on the front lines during the pandemic deserve better. They deserve respect. They deserve our gratitude. they deserve security, and they deserve a pathway to citizenship. Let's recognize that farm workers, most of the adults having lived here on average 18 years, is a very different group of workers, residents, than those that may have showed up at the southern border in the last couple of months. Let's not conflate the two issues. Addressing the challenges at the border, reforming our amnesty system is important, but let's not let that stand in the way of justice for farm workers and other essential workers. That's why I support the Farm Workforce Modernization Act, and that's why I was inspired to introduce the Citizenship for Essential Workers Act as my first bill in the Senate. It is fundamentally wrong for the United States government to recognize workers and deem them essential, yet deny them legal protections and status at the same time. As the proud son of immigrants, I know that immigrants have always been essential since long before the pandemic. So passing immigration reform that respects the dignity and the worth of all immigrants is also a recognition of their contribution to our economy and our national security. So I look forward to today's hearing, to hearing from the witnesses, and to making it clear what Congress can do to act to ensure farm workers have these basic rights and protections. Thank you.
Thanks, Chairman Padilla. The ranking